Hello, everybody. Terrence Lehue here with another episode of the Intellectual Agrarian podcast, where we talk philosophy from the farm. Today, we are concluding our interview with Evan Thomsen from eRochefoucauld. Our discussion today will focus on Jefferson's political philosophy and its effect in both agriculture and our modern political language. I like how our conversation today kind of recircles some themes that we discussed in part one of the interview. If you haven't already listened to that, be sure to check out last week's interview, which was part one of our interview with Evan. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode to hear about our great next guest. Now enjoy the conclusion of this interview with Evan Thomsen. Thomas Jefferson is, I've got a little bust of him sitting on my desk right now. He is the intellectual agrarian who kind of started some of this. What were your first thoughts when I first brought up Thomas Jefferson as a topic of discussion?
I said yes.
I like that answer.
Yeah. No, I was immediately enthusiastic. I was immediately, yes. I was like, one, yes, absolutely. I want to talk about Jefferson. I haven't spoken about American founding fathers or American founding principles as much as I think maybe I should be at times. I'm trying to spend more time doing that. And then my second one was, obviously, you want to talk about Jefferson.
Of course. Yeah,
there's a phrase that Jefferson, before he died, I forget to whom he said this, but he said, "Take care of me when I'm dead." And, meaning his ideas, his legacy, his impact, his works on the Republic itself, on the United States. And I would say that a podcast titled "The Intellectual Agrarian," with, as you have put it, he's kind of the founding father of your podcast. I would say that's definitely accurately taking care of him while he's dead.
He said it to James Madison, it looks like.
Yeah.
Which would make sense. Madison, for anyone who is, I'm sorry, we're going to get a little bit more in the history of this, but if you're not familiar with the story, Madison was Jefferson's protege. He was president after Jefferson and really carried on Jefferson's political legacy, if not his. And really, I think that we discussed this earlier, we don't appreciate, but pretty much most of the original founding fathers were what I would consider intellectual agrarians. They were well-educated individuals who applied ideas in their agriculture. And I'm not saying you have to be well-educated to be an intellectual agrarian. What I'm saying is that they applied ideas to what they did. Yeah,
I would agree with that. I mean, and you can see in terms of what they did, right? If we describe what they did as starting a country.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, little things like that. I mean, who cares?
A startup.
That is going to be a sitcom on HBO one of these days.
Yeah.
Forget Silicon Valley. It's going to be like the startup founding fathers in Silicon Valley.
The startup country.
Startup country.
Well, actually, it's interesting, right? That's what we do today. When we talk about politically, and this is a massive reduction, but this is the way that it is talked about, going and building democracies around the world, right? Yeah, you know what I'm talking.
Yeah.
But if we were to really look at what's happening, especially if we were to take, for example, our experience in Afghanistan, our experience in Iraq most recently, the quote-unquote building of democracy, but we are in partnership with these countries and helping them develop their government. And strangely, we don't apply the creation of the United States to this modern process. And we wonder why it keeps going poorly. And it's quite strange to me. So there's a phrase that I heard once, and it's quite interesting. It said, Europe was built on history, or built by history, and America was built by philosophy.
Ooh, I like that.
And I agree with that 100%. When I heard that, I'm like, yes, that's exactly right, because every single one of these founding fathers was a pretty serious intellectual, a pretty serious philosopher, steeped in knowledge of history and political theory and strategy. It's remarkable how lucky we are to have had such a group. And when we don't apply their principles today, when we do types of work around the world in terms of international development, and I don't get it. It's shocking to me. It's like we've not only defined the lessons of history or defied the lessons of history, we've defied our own traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, I'm sorry I have an aside here, but it's
love it.
Specific knowledge that I think you'll enjoy. I was in a refugee camp a few months ago, and they were, oh man, how careful should I be here? Yeah, I think I can talk about this. I was in a Burmese refugee camp a few months ago, and this is Burma. I'm sorry, a Shan refugee camp. Shan/Burmese. I'm trying to be politically balanced. But okay, technically they're ethnically Shan. Okay, and the Shan people are from Burma or Myanmar, and many of them have been exiled in refugee camps because they lost a conflict about 2 decades ago. Anyway, they want their own country, right? Okay, that's a brief summary of the political backdrop. They used to have their own country as well. They refer to where they're from as Shan state. Anyway, I'm speaking with these refugees, and I'm speaking with the men who are my age now, our generation, and they're quite educated. They've been very seriously educated, and they read American history, and they were actually starting to talk to me about American history, and they know their stuff. Like they seriously study American founding documents, and that really got me thinking, because they were fascinated and empowered by it. And you know what they like? They're like, that's what we want for our country. We want that. We want those American founding documents. We want separation of powers. We want voting rights. We want individual liberty. We want freedom of religion. We want freedom of association and speech. They want exactly that in those founding documents. And they read Washington, and they read Jefferson, and they read about our war for independence. They read about Lincoln too. The individuals I was speaking to, they said that their favorite presidents were Washington and Lincoln. And these are Shan refugees in a refugee camp in northern Thailand on the Myanmar border, and they're talking more about American history and understanding it than almost anyone I've met in the United States who's in my peer group.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just to be faced with this immediate reminder of yeah, these ideas are super powerful. And these are ideas that a lot of people around the world really want. And for some reason, we as the United States, even though we have not always we have missed the mark on many occasions on living up to the ideas we set forth. And even in the very beginning, all men are created equal. We fell damn far short of that from the beginning.
Yeah.
The point is that all Americans, and then now increasingly people around the world, are taking those ideas and saying, no, yeah, sure, some people were hypocrites and they failed and they didn't really mean it. But yeah, we want those ideas. That's what we want. Exactly. And it's powerful. It's powerful to think about.
When the Constitution was being written, can't remember what question Madison was asked, but James Madison, who's Jefferson's considered is the one who wrote the Declaration of Independence, and really it's James Madison who's kind of considered the architect of the Constitution as it's written, which it's interesting because, as I said, he was Jefferson's protege, but he was asked something about the gathering of the people that were there, and Madison said something to the extent of it was a meeting of demigods. Because these were, and I just think it's interesting because those people, had it been anyone other than them, that unique group it's very rare in history to have a group like that was able to even come to some decision, because they did have conflicts amongst each other, but they managed to create something that, as you said, really is unique. It's something that we take for granted too easily.
Yeah, definitely. And when you mention the conflict between them like that, I know you want to get into this, but that is what Enlightenment philosophy was. That there's a state is not one thing of perfect agreement. Enlightenment philosophy is not this one thing that one person wrote up and all of the philosophers and political theorists agreed with them. Like, there's massive dissent amongst people within the traditions, but that's part of the point. That's the point was not to have this particular set of ideas to be absolute and correct. It was, wait a minute, we know that there's this big set of good ideas that we need. Now the goal is to hold as many of them together as possible, because that is what a higher goal is. And so I actually thought of an example, because I was thinking about this in terms of an example of a country that builds itself based upon Enlightenment philosophy and a country that builds itself based upon particularism and things that sound good at the time. Yeah? Are you accept?
Yeah, let's go with this.
Okay, so here is let me make sure I have these notes here. Okay, first I want to set this up in another interesting way on the concept of like second, third order, etc. long-term effects. Yeah?
Yep.
Long-term impact, like the long game. And this is, and when we look at state building or even life building, but like, let's say state building, right? All great states, to some level, were created by some individual or some set of individuals who had the crazy idea to build something that would last 1,000 years, right? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
And if you're going to be serious about that, you have to have a set of ideas that work together in a way that is accounting for longer term order effects, So here's kind of a very simple way of explaining the rationality behind this, though, right? Because there's a philosophical problem in multiple orders, but there's actually a very simple and sophisticated answer for this from the philosopher Donald Davidson. He's actually a more modern philosopher, and he's an American, but quite interesting. And he said, and his ideas are based upon ideas of reasons as causes, right? And so here's his example, right? You turn on the light by flipping the switch. Now, that's not the cause. The light didn't turn on because you flipped the switch, even though that's scientifically true. Really, the light turned on because you wanted to have a light. Okay, so there. This is immediately thinking about second and third order effects, right?
Yeah.
So this allows us to be able to maintain that there's a rational explanation that doesn't need to involve an explicit reference to any first step, direct law-like regularity, because it's because when we look at law, we have this desire to say we write this law and then this first thing happens. But that's the worst thing you can do for state building or for life planning, because you need, but what about what happens next? What happens next? What happens after that? What are the super long-term things? Because those aren't just the things that happen over long term. They're also the things that then expand. Because the thing that happens immediately next, or that first order idea, that's like the smallest group of people. And this is also like, you can imagine this with when you drop the pebble in the pond, yeah? And it expands out. The very first expansion, that's extremely small, but everything else, wider and wider and wider, the spread is greater. And so that's what you have to be thinking towards, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So on that basis is what America, or was how America was founded. And so it's inextricably founded on philosophy, on deep, deep thinking, and on non-first cause ideas, but long-term deduction and calculation, right? And the reason why is because the reason was to maintain a free, independent, and strong state. They had the right reason at the top. The reason wasn't a sub-idea like rights or liberties. Rights and liberties are important. But if you just make your goal rights and liberties, you're going to be missing this whole host of other ideas. And so it's like, wait a minute, no, how do we acquire rights and liberties? A free, independent, and strong state that has checks and balances, that has balance of power, something like that, right? Okay, so how does that manifest people with that goal? What's the first line? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. In order to form a more perfect, there, line number 1, in order to form a more perfect union. That's the type of first sentence you get when your goal is we want something to last ostensibly forever, or as long as it possibly can. Now, in order to form a more perfect union, establish such sub-clauses as justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. So here, the goal is not rights or liberties, but to secure and advance the best state. And so from there, now we get like what rights and liberties are necessary to do this. Okay, well, that's a conversation. But we know that that's an ongoing conversation, though. The rights and liberties don't become the maximal goal. It's to secure a more perfect union. And so they thought, okay, well, what rights and liberties do we need? Maybe we should write them down, maybe like 10 of them, something like that. Call it a Bill of Rights. But this is just like that goal of turning on the light, right? It's to be able to see in the dark or something more. Or even beyond that, to read, to work, to accomplish something. You know, like that was the type of thinking, right? Okay, so here's an alternative. Here's another constitution. Conscious of their responsibility before God and man, inspired by the determination to promote world peace as an equal partner in a united Europe, the German people, in the exercise of their constituent power, have adopted this basic law. Germans in all the regions have achieved the unity and freedom of Germany and free self-determination. That's the initial constitution. Inspired by the determination to promote world peace as an equal partner in a united Europe. What are they doing? Article number 1, human dignity shall be inviolable. To respect and protect it shall be the duty of all state authority. That's terrifying.
Yeah, that's kind of like makes my skin crawl almost.
What is human dignity? Man, if we're going to have that specific of a term that different people are going to interpret in widely different ways, you're going to make it Article 1 and under all state authority? To respect human dignity, respect all under the with all state authority. Article 6, marriage and the family shall enjoy the special protection of the state. The care and upbringing of children is the natural right of parents and a duty primarily incumbent upon them. The state shall watch over them in the performance of this duty. The state shall watch over them in the performance of this duty. These are terrifying laws. Absolutely. What is justified under this type of language? I don't know. Now, I quite like laws that say something like the government can't do anything unless it is explicitly stated that it's allowed to.
Yeah.
I really like that idea. Because if you really care about, because this, again, first order or long-term order, right? Because the goal there is individual liberty. Now, you could write something like, individual liberty shall be inviolable, and it is the duty of the state to respect it with all of its authority. What? No. If you really care about individual liberty, you say something like, The government can't do anything to anyone except for these explicit things. And these explicit things shall be determined by the people in this way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, here's another one. The entire school system shall be under the supervision of the state. Article 7. I'm in case it isn't clear, I'm reading from the German Constitution.
Yeah, for whatever reason, now perhaps it's merely just the way that my brain works. For whatever reason, my brain just keeps flashing back to Orwell, or that name keeps popping up.
Yeah, no, but those are scary laws.
No, I mean, dear goodness. Dear goodness.
Article 13, the home is inviolable. Searches may be authorized only by a judge or when time is of the essence, because...
Oh, wow. Let's put that clause in there.
By other authorities designated by the laws and may be carried out only in the manner therein prescribed. Well, that's all the clarity I need.
Yeah.
My home is inviolable, but it can be searched by a judge or other authorities.
Other authorities.
That's good. So there's a difference between a state built upon Enlightenment philosophy and Enlightenment values, and a state built upon here are the things that we just messed up on, and we need to correct these things right now, and this needs to sound and look good.
Mm-hmm.
And again, for a lot of first order effects.
Wow. I'm not moving to Germany anytime soon.
I'm not trying to snipe Germany here,
No, but
I'm not trying to be, overly critical. I'm not trying to offend any Germans. I also thought, especially in this day and age, because we're not allowed to say anything about anything that's not a part of our identity group. My great grandfather was from Germany, so I thought, that's there.
Hey,
it's the best.
Know what? There you go. But yeah, I mean, that's a good way of looking at is the difference of where are you setting, how are you going about it? And this is with agriculture. I'm just going to kind of go back to that because that's my domain here. But you have to do things in a certain order to get a certain effect and get the right effect. When you're applying certain nutrients, you're doing it for the long term. In more conventional agriculture, you use nutrients that immediately are accessible to the plant because you were trying to get that immediate effect. Within organic agriculture and more eco-friendly agriculture, you're using natural products that have a delay time. There's an amount of time it takes for the nutrient to be basically digested by the ground, and it actually improves the soil itself rather than simply here's the input. It's doing things in a certain order, in a certain time. It's like saying in the defuse the bomb instructions, hey, cut the blue wire, but first make sure you cut the red one.
The only way you get knee high by the 4th of July is because your corn grew every day.
Uh-huh.
It's not overnight. And that's what development is. Development is daily growth. A policy and principle that you are able to enact and consistently deliver that allows something, whatever it is, to grow daily, consistently and in a stable manner. And if you don't have those things, you have volatility. And volatility, whether you're talking about crops or markets or your life, or your health, it's, you can't, it doesn't work like, I'm going to eat a bunch of healthy food here, and then I'm just going to eat tons and tons of junk food for a couple days. It's like, well, I don't care if you ate, organic food for 20 days of the month, and then you took a break for 3 or 4 days and just ate Cheetos. Like, you're going to suffer for that. even if 95% of your diet was quality, it's like, well, okay, sure, maybe spread out the Cheetos over the month, and you're going to be fine.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we're going to diverge here into, because I don't want to take too much of your time. When we talk about Jefferson's philosophy, would you say that there was much difference between his philosophy in terms of practical politics and his philosophy when it came to his personal life at his home?
Well, yes, I would say, yeah. I don't know how much, if I would be able to know enough about his personal life and his home. How I would answer this is I would say, yes, I do see a difference. And by that mainly, I mean, when I look at Jefferson's political philosophy that he clearly personally held, that if we were to say, all right, Jefferson, under no constraints, you get to do what you want. Okay, there's a set of things I think that he would do differently than what he actually did when he governed, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I do. Actually, this is a standard I like to apply in any context. Even in the modern of the modern context. Okay, sure, the president said this or that. How did the president govern? Mm-hmm. What have they actually done? What laws have they actually passed? Now, I'm not saying statements don't matter. They do matter. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying attitude doesn't matter. It does. I'm not saying past writings or leaked tapes from buses. I'm not saying they don't matter. They definitely matter, and they can have an impact. But what I care most about by far is how did they govern? Mm-hmm. What laws did they actually pass? What were the tangible effects of their leadership that we can materially identify? And so when I apply that standard to Jefferson, I do see that there are some differences, right? So if we look at Jefferson, the political philosopher, we see this cosmopolitan, European, academic elite. Again, he's a super like we treat Woodrow Wilson as the first academic, technically PhD president, but it's just like no. Jefferson was, he wasn't a professor, he wasn't a PhD, but like he was the first serious academic, serious genius level hyper philosopher, and he was president. That is undeniable. If you read the guy's writings, it's like, this person was off the charts. He had a towering intellect. And so very, very sophisticated, very, very European. You see him advocating even all the time for, bringing in European ideas, European scholars, European academics to U.S. universities, and the very, very worldly policies and things like that. But then when you look at how he governed, he was quite protectionist at times. He was very, I would say, his policies harmed Europe. He restricted trade from the UK at points. He, in worrying about French re-engagement in the area, that kind of precipitated the strategy behind the Louisiana Purchase. And many of the reasons for that as well was to help secure and develop and allow the American farmer to have access to efficient trade routes. And so you see this stark difference there. And then there's another difference as well. You also see within his writings this idea, as you obviously will very well, be the strongest advocate of, this intellectual agrarian idea, this farm type of philosophy, this deep, deep respect for the common man, for the country, the farm side, the people living and working off the land, using their hands, stuff like that. You see this deep, deep appreciation for that within a lot of his writings. While at the same time, when you then look at some of his governing, you see the development of national roads. You see the development of Washington, D.C. You do see the growth of cities. On the one hand, you could call these contradictions, but on the other hand, again, I would call this is what Enlightenment philosophy looks like. This is what holding a bunch of different positive and important ideas and principles look like. So yes, there is a contradictory Jefferson, but when you look at him in the aggregate, the grand scheme of things, it's like this was overall a lot of positive activity. And you can't necessarily square it within every instance, but when you see the full tapestry of things, there's a positive coherence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this kind of gets into what I want to talk about next, which is we easily, especially with Hamilton fever right now, everyone kind of pits Hamilton as the industrialist versus Jefferson, the regressive agrarian, who didn't want us to have manufacturing. Whereas, I mean, look at the historical record, he actually did a lot to encourage manufacturing starting in the United States. He knew from his own dealings producing the raw materials that he, without the ability to in the United States to turn raw materials into finished products, the United States would never become one of the first countries in the world.
Yeah, no, definitely. But again, that's just what I'm saying, right? When you look at the language, and obviously there's this, again, a deep love for the farmer, a deep love for the simple life. And I'm not saying that he was a hypocrite to these ideals, but it was also to say he was an authentic leader, and an authentic leader makes hard choices, and has to hold, again, a lot of different competing principles together. And yeah, at the end of the day, no matter how much you love the farm, we need manufacturing, we need economic development, and these things also, they help that as well. And so if we were to take the Hamilton line, right, obviously I love the musical. It is great. Yeah, but the amount of Hamilton experts that exist today is quite strange. I'm not trying to be mean though, because seriously though, I love this is in part what I'm trying to do. I want to make education fun and engaging and accessible, and it's like a group of people. Lin-Manuel Miranda taught more people about U.S. history than almost anybody.
Yeah, it's true.
It
works.
It's brilliant, great. More people definitely know more about Hamilton, Washington, about some key founding events and ideas than they did before. That's a net win, in my view. And I listen to a lot of testimony on the Hill and a lot of Senate hearings and stuff like that, and I do see a lot of people quote the musical, and it's funny sometimes. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's cheesy, but at the same time, again, that's another thing as well, where it's like, wait a minute, yeah, these are good ideas. Remember them. They're simple.
Yeah.
He distilled them in a very simple, basic form, but the simple, basic form is what gets carried forward. And this is where, in a way, we're all Jeffersonian. Maybe one of the things that was missed within Hamilton was, if there was ever a capitalist, Hamilton was. So I'm not blind to the world. I would say most of the people who quite champion Hamilton the musical might also not necessarily champion capitalism. And if there were ever a capitalist, it would be Hamilton, a Scotsman out of the mold of Adam Smith. I mean, he wanted development in financial markets, centralization of financial power within federal government, strong investment, strong manufacturing, the growth of cities for the purpose of growing wealth, in a programmatic approach to wealth development from the federal government, very, very capitalist and pro-business development government approach. That was Hamilton's policy. But then, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But as I was saying, we're all Jeffersonians in this way. We all speak like Jeffersonians, and that's simple, Enlightenment, aspirational, principle-based types of language. And so that's where I'm saying there's this divide. It's how he governed wasn't necessarily governance of principle. And it's of course you have to govern on principle and practical and policy and crisis. There's a lot of different things that you have to respond to when you're actually governing, right? But this is, where we kind of see the root in a way, where is he being pulled, and where does this kind of help our language be pulled? Whenever we're trying to enact a big new idea, or a big new enlightenment, or a big new liberty we all need, we don't become Hamiltonians and say, well, this is reasonable, and this is rational, and this is coherent, and this makes sense, and this can be, attributed out in the following ways. No, we go to Jefferson language. We say things like, I have a dream, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We use big, almost romantic, strongly principle-rooted, aspirational, somewhat identity-based as well, types of language to inspire people.
I kind of want to circle back to a comment you had made earlier, which was that Jefferson wasn't just, he respected the agrarians, he was one, but at the same token, he did advocate during his presidency and his work for making a market for the farmers almost. I mean, really, he understood that without a way to utilize the raw inputs, the raw materials produced, they would be subject to the exports overseas. We can almost say the similar idea to now and what we said earlier about not everyone should be farmers. Without someone to consume, farmers can produce for themselves, but it does take a buyer. And I think that that's an interesting, I want to say correlation between now and then, but certainly an interesting observation.
Yeah, well, but that's another thing that, again, is almost, that's not anti-farmer, that's obvious in a way.
Yeah.
The point of farming is not to, at least for a nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm thinking about me and me alone, yeah, I want to be sustainable. I want to provide for me. Again, first order, just one step, right? What do I want to turn on the light? How do I do it? Just by flipping the switch. Okay, no more thinking, If I'm just thinking about me, I want to be sustainable, I want to be efficient, something like that. And my wife actually says this all the time, we are allowed to live our lifestyle because other people are living a different lifestyle. And by making food, for example.
Yeah.
I don't make any food. Like, we have to cooperate. It's
well, and the point I think is interesting here is that in the bad rap that the eco-agricultural community can sometimes get is you get farmers that are a little bit too up their own butts about, I'm doing this to save the world, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. You are farming in a different way. You're caring about the greenhouse emissions, all this fun stuff. But at the end of the day, it's the person buying from you that makes your life possible.
Yeah.
So don't complain about the urban people who their cars are ruining the earth. Again, important principles, but you have to coexist. You do need to have someone who will purchase your products. And at the end of the day, if your marketing style is, I'm saving the earth one carrot at a time, you're not going to go very far. It's your customers that are saving the earth by buying one carrot at a time from you.
No, exactly. You need to listen to my dialogues number 10. You need to listen to my 10th episode in the dialogues, where I was speaking to business leaders who that's their approach to business. They're trying to teach businesses that generosity is actually a tool of marketing. And their basis on this argument is to say, no, you business that has a CSR program, you're not generous. Your customer is generous because they walk in the door. They allow you to be generous, bring them into that relationship. But that's the same everywhere. But this is a beautiful principle to me. And speaking of, good first principles and a Jeffersonian idea of what we need to get back to, my basis is cooperation. I'm pro cooperation. Whomever is out there trying to advance people working together effectively, I'm on your team. I'm tired of the people who are trying to, and I know this is kind of a cheesy way of putting it, but divide everybody, but there's more to it than that. There's a technical thing that's happening. There are people who seem to be the enemies of human cooperation out there. And some of this is being built into our language, where it's like, wait a minute, no, we make products for people. We do better when we work with others. The more we can work with others, the higher we can climb. So we need to try to facilitate a more perfect union.
It all circles back.
Yeah, it does. It really does. It all circles. And again, and now I can almost go into, again, the introduction of why I started my podcast, right? these old ideas are remarkable, and they're not even understood. The old ideas are not even understood by a mass audience, and meanwhile we're trying to learn some new deconstructionist, postmodernist philosophy that teaches us that words don't have meaning. Okay, well, that's how do we work together? Because we need to work together, because society exists because a lot of people have agreed to work together and play nice. That's how we have all this stuff. Like, and down to the farming level. Yep, we're growing food for people to eat. And so to now go into the difference between the individual versus the society. If I'm just me, I want to be sustainable. But if I'm a president, or if I'm but if we're thinking presidential, or if we're thinking leadership, it's like, no. I can't have a bunch of individuals just thinking about being sustainable, and because they might as well just go into their own cave and hide and not talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
That we need a society where people are working together and developing one another, and again, the higher society climbs is going to be based upon the net combined and productive efforts that reinforce and multiply upon one another within all of its individuals. And that's kind of like, again, like the grand agreement, the grand bargain that all states make. And, maybe we need a new one. I don't know. Maybe we need to remember the old one.
I think it's great that this is what we're talking about. I'm subscribed to the Daily Stoic emails, and literally this morning's email was that virtue requires that there's an obligation to virtue. It feeds back into the community that you're in. Philosophy, your actions, your thoughts, your ideas really don't mean much unless they're put back into the system you're in, into your community. And this is what we talk about with philosophy. What good is it if no one understands it, if it doesn't have an effect, if it doesn't make a difference?
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And I mean, there's an arc, and I like some of his philosophy, but Hegel, who, on his deathbed said, "Nobody understands me," and he's renowned as a highly regarded, world-renowned, beloved, extremely influential philosopher. And it's just like, wait, but that's terrible for the world. No one understands me. Oh, only people, and the only people that really can are apparently, people with a 150 plus IQ who have read the collected works of Kant and Descartes and Locke and Rousseau and Hegel and Marx. It's just like, man, what are you doing to help the world in that period of time? And then how is that effective? Oh man, everybody needs to have a 150 plus IQ then. And is that even going to be a good thing for the world? To have non-differentiated intelligence quotients? Mm. I think differentiated intelligence and personality and interest is what makes the world go round, and what actually, allows things to change and refresh. And so it's just like when you look at a lot of the, again, deconstructionists, postmodernist philosophy, which largely kind of has a very old founding father of Hegel and Marx and Engels. When you look at that, it's like there are some really interesting ideas that I like in there that I do appreciate. There are very interesting critiques, period. Not norms, not standards, not laws, not rules, not principles, critiques. And that's important. I'm pro-critique. But when you recognize them as non-critiques, it's just like, oh man, you've flipped the apple cart. You've turned the critique into a maxim. And it's like, no, that's the opposite. That's what we're not supposed to do. The critique is the thing to keep in mind, not the thing to base an entire philosophy or society off of.
Now, if you don't mind to kind of wrap up the interview here, we could go on talking, I think, for hours on this. Thank you so much. I kind of want to end with actually a quote that you put on your Instagram page. Your highest philosophy is represented through action.
Yep.
And as we talk about Jefferson, that's part of what made him distinct, is that his philosophy was enacted. And that's what philosophy should be. That's what I hope people that listen to this show do with their knowledge, with what they're learning here, is put it into practice. And part of that will be going and checking out Evan's podcast and all that fun stuff. Evan, where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
They can definitely check out my website, which is eRochefoucauld.org. That, of course, spelling eRochefoucauld.org. You can also check out my personal website, evanthomsen.com. And my last name is spelled uncommonly too, Thomsen. But I'm sure, of course, you'll be linking that stuff. And then you can find me on social media, but definitely the best place to start, if you do visit my website, I'd really appreciate that. I put a lot of work into it. It's a good representative of some of my work, especially if you go to that Story of Philosophy page that I put together, and the podcasts that I put with that as well. I think that's something I'm quite proud of. But I do have one kind of cool announcement.
Ooh, yes.
Today is the 1-year anniversary of eRochefoucauld.
Congratulations.
Yeah. 1-year anniversary of the podcast. 1 year ago today, September 15th, I published my pilot episode. And today, obvious. Well, it won't be today when your episode gets released, but on September 15th, I will be releasing, or today, right? I'm ahead of you though. It's September 14th for you.
Yes.
But anyway, today I'll be releasing a new episode of Hardcore Philosophy. I've actually quite evolved the podcast. It's kind of come into its next phase. It's taken me about a year to get to this point of learning and developing and really figuring out exactly what I'm trying to do and the best product. But I'll be launching a new episode. It'll be the first part in a mega series I'm doing, and that'll be titled An Epic of Masculinity. And so for basically the rest of this year, I'm going to be telling the past 4,000 to 5,000 years of stories across diverse archetypes and around the world that societies have used to teach men how to be ethical, upright, and competent. And yeah, so that's what I'm going to be doing in the Hardcore Philosophy podcast for the rest of the year. And part 1 will be released today.
That's awesome. Thanks again, Evan, for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed this.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode, and for Evan for coming on the show. Links to Evan's work can be found in the show notes. I listened to the first episode of The Epic of Masculinity on the Hardcore Philosophy podcast. It's a great listen, and I do recommend it. We hope you've enjoyed this slight departure from our usual kind of guest and interview. Next week, we'll take a brief break and then return the following week with an interview from our next guest, Stephen Cornett, from Nature's Always Right in Lemon Grove, California. Thanks again for listening. This has been Terrence Lehue and the Intellectual Agrarian Podcast, reminding you to keep farming the dream.